From the Oklahoma newsroom, it is time for the Red Zone, our weekly extended look at Oklahoma football, and we've got lots to talk about. I'm Jenny Carlson here in studio with fellow columnist Barry Trammell, OU beat writer Ryan Aber. As we sit here, news not yet official from Oklahoma, but guys, it looks like Alex Grinch is the new defensive coordinator at Oklahoma. Ryan, let's start with this. He's coming from Ohio State, but hasn't been with the Buckeyes long, co-defensive coordinator there. What can you say about his track record to this point?
Well, I mean, you just look what he did with Washington State's defense over 3 years prior to coming to Ohio State. This year he was a co-defensive coordinator with the Buckeyes under Greg Schiano. Greg Schiano was the primary defensive play caller, but the calling card of his Cougars defenses were turnovers, and he made that an emphasis from day one getting there. Oklahoma was historically bad when you look at their history at forcing turnovers. In the recorded history of Oklahoma football, they had the fewest turnovers that Oklahoma has ever had, and that's really something we expected to be a point of emphasis. But Alex Grinch, that's number one on his list. He said the point of defense is getting the ball back in your offense's hands.
He's also a 38-year-old, Barry, which when we were thinking about who might Lincoln Riley go after, the thought was get the defensive Lincoln Riley. Do you think that Lincoln Riley found his defensive doppelganger?
Well, sounds good. I mean, it's easy to talk tough. It's easy to say, hey, get the ball back. Just making the other team punt gets the ball back to you, too. So, this part of the country, we'll take about anything we can get defensively. So, he sounds great. He comes from good heritage, had great years at Washington State, installed some really serious defense there at a place where that's not easy. He came up, coached with his uncle, Gary Pinkel, who we know from old Big 12 days is a big-time coach. So the Ohio State experience can't hurt. So, yeah, it all sounds great. Sort of fit checked all the boxes that Lincoln Riley was looking for.
Ryan, as I think about his time at Ohio State, short-lived as it was, the Buckeyes weren't as great defensively this last year as they maybe have been in past years. Some people might look at that and say, now hold on a second, is this guy really going to improve the Oklahoma defense? But if I look at Washington State, what I'm seeing is right, he did with lesser talent at Washington State the kind of thing that Oklahoma would frankly have killed for the last few years.
Yeah, if Oklahoma has Washington State's defense from 2017, there's a good chance that they're playing football on Monday instead of hiring Alex Grinch to be their defensive coordinator. So Alex Grinch was fantastic at Washington State, like you said, with lesser talent. Recruiting hasn't been the problem with Oklahoma's defense over the last couple of years. Before that, there had been a little bit of a dip. They've gotten better. Obviously, they need to get better recruiting up front there, and that's just really tough in the Big 12 to get big defensive tackles, especially ones who aren't from Oklahoma. They sort of stumble into a guy like Gerald McCoy, things like that. You can get those guys, but it's more difficult to go outside of your region. So I think Alex Grinch checks all the boxes. He rapidly improved the defense at Washington State, has been a solid recruiter, is younger, and the turnover thing, like I mentioned.
Let's talk about what else might change besides who's sitting in the defensive coordinator's office. Barry, if you're Alex Grinch, if you're coming into this situation, what are the first few things that you look to change? Is it coaches? Is it, I don't even know, meeting style? What do you go in and try to change right away?
Well, first of all, the staff. You got to get your staff set. I assume there will be changes. I don't know that, but I assume there will be. Alex Grinch been coaching the secondary, so that's probably not good news for Kerry Cooks. You would think Alex Grinch would want to go coach where he's comfortable, but get that staff settled, and then you start implementing whatever the new system is. And we've talked a lot. Oklahoma defense needs a total cultural change. They need to think differently. They need to train differently. They need to play differently. One thing they really need to do is get guys to play more aggressive, play more with their hair on fire. Too much standing around, too much looking around, too much just sort of waving. Oklahoma defense has become very passive, and we saw that epitomized in the game that cost Mike Stoops his job, where Texas kept throwing slants to their wide receivers, and they drug half the state of Oklahoma with them 6, 7, 8 yards, and finally Lincoln Riley said enough is enough. The toughness factor probably is what needs to change. on the practice field and eventually in games.
All right, Ryan, what do you say to Alex Grinch if he says, what do I do? What should I do when I first get to Norman?
Well, I think it's changed the staff. And Barry mentioned Kerry Cooks. It's unlikely that he'll be back. You would imagine that there could be some changes with guys like Tim Kish, Ruffin McNeil. Maybe it's them stepping away from an on-field role and doing something else inside the program. I've got to think Calvin Thibodeau is going to be back. He has mentioned defensive linemen. He has recruited well, especially this most recent class. Lincoln Riley really singled him out on signing day. He's a young guy with obviously ties to Oklahoma. It would surprise me if they got rid of him. I think everybody else is sort of open. But beyond that, it's more like Barry mentioned, attitude and the finer points that they do to try to get this defense moving in a different direction. It's not that structurally different from what they've done before. Alex Grinch is a 3-4 guy. He likes the bringing the rush ends off the edges, as we've seen for Oklahoma for a while. Although a lot of times he puts them with their hand on the ground. But so it's going to be a little bit different, but nothing really seismic shift fundamentally for what they do defensively. It's mainly just going to be about attitude and effort has lacked on this defense the last few years.
You know, guys, as I was watching the national semifinal against Alabama, a game that ended up being really close, fun to watch, but the thing I was struck by was when you watch Alabama play defense, and this was not one of those great Alabama defenses. They're really good, but they're not one of those really fantastic defenses that Nick Saban's had some years. And yet you almost forget how routine they make so many things. Tackling. When they missed a tackle, you were like, oh my gosh, they missed a tackle. Stuff that Oklahoma has fissures in the defense on a regular basis. Lincoln Riley talked about that the morning after the game, Barry, that he felt like his team wasn't as far from Alabama as some people might think. Yet it's hard. I mean, maybe they're not that far, but it seems like night and day almost with the defenses.
They're a long way from Alabama because of that defense. Just getting penetration from the line, getting upfield on the pass rush, just things that used to be standard in Norman, and now is, if you're the worst defense in the Big 12, which Oklahoma was, believe it or not, Oklahoma was in 2018.
And they didn't have to play the Oklahoma offense.
And they did not have to play against Kyler Murray. So if you're that, you're a long way from Alabama. Now, the offense was so good that they put up a fight and made the Orange Bowl interesting. But this is not a hire the right guy and everything changes overnight. Alex Grinch has a fairly arduous task in front of him to try to build this defense back. It's not going to be a one-year thing.
All right, guys, before we get out of here, let's talk about some other changes, that being players on the offensive side declaring for the NFL draft. Ryan, we haven't really had a chance to digest this in whole. Cody Ford, Marquise Brown. I mean, some guys that we expected would have jumped. What's your sense of impact as you think about the guys that have announced that they're foregoing last year's to move on to the NFL?
Well, I mean, clearly these were both big losses, and they're likely to get a couple more of those guys throw their name in. Obviously, Kyler Murray, one way or another, figures to be gone. Bobby Evans has a decision to make, and I'm told that he's sort of on the fence about what he's going to do. But big loss for Cody Ford at right tackle. He's a guy who really went a long way towards solidifying that line this year. Marquise Brown, we know what he did, maybe the best overall receiver in Oklahoma history. When you look at it, his numbers were really high. Didn't play for very long, just 2 seasons, and a lot of this season he was banged up. Still put up huge numbers. The good news is for him at that position, it seems like Charleston Rambo, as we found out in the Orange Bowl, is a pretty good replacement. He's not going to be Marquise Brown. He's not that guy who's going to streak down the field and show off that speed that Marquise Brown did. But Charleston Rambo can do quite a bit. They've already got CeeDee Lamb, who was a really good receiver for him this year. But losing Cody Ford, and if they lose Bobby Evans, that's another big blow just for that offensive line, because they already lose the 2 guards, Ben Powers and Drew Samia, and they've got some talent behind them, especially at the tackle spots, but it's unproven talent.
Barry, of those 2, Marquise Brown and Cody Ford, who do you think has the longer NFL career?
I'm going to say Cody Ford. Offensive linemen can last a good long while. So can receivers, but Marquise doesn't weigh all that much. You know, he built himself. He's probably had, he had probably a 15% weight gain and still only weighs 160 pounds. So, you know, he's a great weapon. He'll have some big moments, but, you know, 2 or 3 times a year they're going to pop him really good. And when they do, he's not going to have a lot of protection on those bones. So Cody Ford, I think, is a big-time talent. I would expect Cody Ford to have a nice, long NFL career.
All right, lots more to come on guys as it relates to the NFL draft. We'll obviously have ongoing coverage of Alex Grinch's arrival at Oklahoma, whether he makes some changes on that defensive staff. Lots of questions left to be answered, and we'll try to get those answers for you, so be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman.